Okay, good morning and welcome to today's webinar in Questback Essentials. My name is Michael Sciarrone and I will be hosting today's webinar. I am streaming this webinar from the Questback headquarters office in Oslo, Norway. Welcome to everybody who is joining us online. You can feel free to ask questions during this webinar in the chat. I will try to answer them as I go along. There will also be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar where I'll run through the chat and make sure to answer all your questions. But as I said, should there be any as we move along through the different aspects of the software, just feel free to ask them as we move along. Today's webinar is titled Before Publishing, and we will be looking at how to create a quest, administer your account, how to set up the quest with questions, different settings. We're going to look a little bit at testing and validating before we publish, and then we'll take a sneak peek at distribution when we get that far. If somebody who is listening could just type something in the chat to make sure that everybody can hear me loud and clear and that we're ready to go, that would be much appreciated. I'm going to assume that since my audio levels are good here and everything seems to be working all right, let's just go ahead. So as you can see, I am logged into Essentials. This is my home screen. It gives me a quick overview of the last quests that I worked in. Gives me a little quick numerical summary of the quests I have, the completions, the invitations, things like that. I have a work history tab down here, which is basically the same as the list of quests up here. Over on the right here, this is a fairly important area of Questback Essentials. This is where we publish our newest updates, information about when we're going to do the updates, information about what's included in the updates, also maintenance messages, things like that. So I'd encourage you to keep an eye on that area whenever you log in to see if there's any news, anything worth noting. So I think without further ado, I don't see any responses in the chat, but as I said, my levels seem good and we are streaming. So I'm going to go ahead and create a quest that we can work in today's webinar. Now, there are four main ways in Essentials you create a quest. You can do it from scratch. You can do a quest from a template. We have some templates. You can also make your own. You can duplicate an existing quest, and you can continue working in one of your existing quests. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button here, Create Quest. It's going to take me to our new landing page. As you can see here, I have all those four possibilities in front of me. So I have the Create from Scratch up at the top left. To the right of those, I have the templates. So you'll see where it says Customer Experience, Employee Experience, Market Research, Training Seminars, Events, and Other. Below here, I can duplicate from an existing quest. So I could type in the name of any quest and it would show up down below here. But you can see now that I haven't typed anything in. It gives me a complete list of all the quests I have access to. It'll start with the ones that I own. You'll see them labeled with my name here. It'll give me a quick idea of how many questions the quest contains. I can do a sneak peek at it. So if I click that, it'll give me a little pop-up and display what it looks like. I can also toggle the views here. So I can go to a list, or I can go to the bullet list here. I can also filter if I want to do that. Now from this page, what I'm going to do for today's webinar is I'm going to go back up to the top left here and do a create from scratch, which gives me a blank empty quest. So I'm going to click this button. Now it's asking me for a title. I'm going to call it Webinar February 10th, 2020. And with this drop down, I'm going to go ahead and select a folder I have where I want to place the quest. I could select any folder in that list. I'm going to go ahead and click Create. and it's going to load into the settings page of my new quest. Now, as you can see, it's fairly empty because we just created it. So let's go ahead and start entering some information. So at the top here, quest type allows me to select from a drop-down different types of quests. Now this is useful, for my own sorting of these quests. So I know, if I'm looking for a specific kind, I can search for customer experience quests, I can search for market research quests, and it also allows it to show up under different categories on that quest landing page that we just visited. So for this one, since it's a training, I'm going to go ahead and say it's a training seminar event. It's my little webinar quest. Now, this internal quest comment, I would typically fill this out if I intended to share this quest with other users or allow them to duplicate it. So I could set a little comment about what the quest is about. So I'll say, this is a training quest from the webinar. The default language is English. That I cannot change. That is picked up from the settings in my account. And the quest name we already entered when we created it. Below here we have an introduction and a thank you note section. I'm going to scroll down a little bit so you can see the whole thing. We're still under the general tab on the settings page, just so I got you guys with me. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to write a little introduction. This will be at the beginning of the quest, visible to all the respondents of this quest. So for the purpose of not spending too much time on this, and since this is a demonstration, I'm just going to say, this is a quest used for demonstration purposes during the webinar. And then typically the thank you note shows up at the end of the quest. I'm going to go ahead and just say, thank you for your participation in this quest. Now I'm going to go ahead down here and click the save button. That way I make sure all my work is always saved and I don't lose anything. And as you can see, both these text editor windows, this one for the introduction and this one for the thank you note, look a little bit like what you would find in, say, Microsoft Word or any other word processing software. You'll have all the different settings. You have bold text, italics, underscore. You have different settings for alignment. You can do fonts. I'm not going to go into details about all of these, but most of these are familiar, as I said, if you've used word processing software. And if not, you'll find information about this in our community if you want to dive into the details here. I'm just going to point out that where it says inherited, that means that it inherits it from a theme. I'll show you themes in a little bit. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a little look down here. Now I can choose if I want to have the respondents redirected upon the quest completion. So for instance, if I have a business website and I want to take them to that website when they're done with the survey, I would click this little square here and I would say, put the URL to my business in this field, and then I would put a delay. So that is, how many seconds do you want to wait from the respondent clicks the send button on the last page of the quest until they're redirected. I typically use 3 seconds, 2 to 3 seconds, unless I have a fairly long thank you note or some vital information I want them to read, then I'll increase the delay. For now, I'm just going to click discard changes. I don't want to redirect upon completion of this quest. I'm going to also point out you don't necessarily have to fill out this introduction up here if you use a GDPR introduction text. We'll get back to that in a little bit. So in that case, I would leave it blank up here. But for now, I'm not going to do that. And I'll get back to this during the GDPR run through. So the next pane, As you'll remember, we started using the General tab here. We're going to scroll down, and we have one called Access Rights. Now, this doesn't have much to do with the respondents. This is for those of us working with the quest, the users in our account. So you can see I'm the owner of this quest, and it's in that folder called Webinar, which I created right before we started today. And that's also the folder that I chose when I created the quest a few minutes ago. Now this little setting here, we just rolled out in our last update to Essentials. And if I check this box, I'll make this quest available to all the other users in my account so they can duplicate it. So for instance, let's say I'm making a quest now that can be sort of a template for similar surveys that we're going to do in my business. In the future, I would click this, and that way my colleagues wouldn't have to start from scratch every time. They could just duplicate this quest, change the dates, maybe update some of the information, and they'd be good to go within minutes. Since this is a demonstration quest, I'm not going to share it. There's nobody to share it with, so we're going to close access rights, and we're going to take a look at hidden identity. Now, what hidden identity does is it allows you to do two things. Number one is to set whether you want to hide the identity of the respondents, and then whether or not the respondents can choose to hide their identity or not. So if you have never, the respondent doesn't get a choice, and the identity is never hidden. If you do optional, this setting right here, then the respondent can choose when they start the quest whether or not they want to hide their identity. By identity, we mean their email address if you invited them by email address, or phone number if it's a text message invitation, and IP addresses, background data, things like that. Now they'll always show up in your distribution list, which we'll look at a little bit later today, but they won't show up in the response. There'll be no visible connection for the administrator of the quest between the distribution and the response panes. So basically, if you do always, then you're always hiding the identity, but you'll see that we just got a second choice here, which is enable advanced hidden identity. So I would also encourage you, whenever you see these tooltips here, these little black question marks, to just put your pointer icon over them and read the tooltips. They are little precise nuggets of information that tell you exactly what's going on. So in this case, it says that when you enable hidden identity, the following settings are available. You can set a response count threshold, and you can disable raw data and individual answer access. So all I'll do is I'll just enable it here, so you'll see these two settings. Now, once again, we have tooltips over here, these black circles with the white question marks. But what we're basically looking at now is we've enabled advanced hidden identity. Now we can set a response count threshold, which means that we're saying we need a certain number of responses to even show the results, right? So, and what you might want to use this for is if you know that based on the number of respondents and some of my questions, I can sort of guess who's responded or not, or who responded what. Say if you know everybody at work that you're sending the survey to, or something like that, then you want to set this response count threshold, so it makes it harder to discern who answered what. And then you can also, lastly here, disable raw data and individual answer access. This is for the follow-up page and for the export page. We're not going to look at that today, but basically this means that the person administering the quest cannot export any metadata, cannot export any data about who the respondents are, and they can't look at the individual responses on the follow-up page. Sorry there. We're going to go ahead and just disable advanced hidden identity settings. I'm going to take this back up to never, and then I'm going to save. The next part here is logo. Now this is fairly simple, fairly straightforward. If you have a company logo, if you have a survey logo, any logo or branding that you want to put up here, you would simply click choose image like this. You get These are all our demo images. You get this little media picker, and you would choose the one you want and insert it. I'm going to go ahead and cross this out. Now, I would use this if I were not using a theme for my quest. If you have like a company theme that you've created or a standard one that you're using, then I would do it under themes here, which we're going to look at in a second. But for logo, I would stick to, as I said, if it's a logo that I'm only using for this quest or in this one instance. So I'm going to go ahead and click theme. Now you'll see it's chosen the essential standard theme. That's the default, which I'm going to leave it at for this webinar. But here is where I would typically click the drop down and change it to one of these other ones if my company had created one where our logo is and our, our graphics are, sort of things like that. And this is where then that logo would be inserted. So I would not put anything here. I would just change to a theme that had the logo and all the company graphics already in it. But as I said, that is basically up to you to decide. A couple of other settings that we have under themes is you can choose to display the quest name or not, and you can choose to display a progress bar at the bottom. I don't know if you can make it out, but there's in the preview here, there's a little progress bar. I typically leave the progress bars on when I make quests. The only times I would possibly not do it are either if the quest is very, very long. So you don't want to discourage people. If they click through 6 pages and it only goes up to 3%, then they might opt out and go, oh, well, I mean, it took me 10 minutes to get to 6%. How long is it going to take me to get to 100%? The other typical scenario to not use a progress bar is if you use a lot of what's called routing, which means you create different paths to go through the survey. Because what will happen is, let's say you have everybody answers page 1, but on page 2, if they answer yes to some of the questions, they get follow-ups. But if they answer no, they go straight to the last page. What they're going to see in the progress bar is it's going to go from, say, 10% to 20% and then jump to 100. And the respondent might go, well, what happened to the percent in the middle there? Where did all those pages go? Did I skip something? So if you use a lot of routing, I would advise not to use the progress bar because that can confuse. But as you'll see later, we have a test option here, so you can always test your quest before you send it out and see for yourself. If you feel it's not confusing, then go ahead and use the progress bar. As a rule of thumb, it's always good to let the respondents have an idea of where they are in the survey. So yeah, I would always try to keep it on, except for in those very specific cases where I have a lot of routing or it's a very, very long quest. I can also select an email theme. You'll see a little later that we have email invitations. And this is basically the same idea as a quest theme. So I can structure my graphics, my logos. I can basically structure the entire email, and then under the email settings, just enter the text that I need for the body of the email. We have a standard theme, which I'm going to leave selected now, but I would once again just click here and in the drop down select whatever theme that I've already created. So I'm going to go ahead and close theme, and we're going to look at response options. Now this is typically where you want to spend a little bit of time. So I have the option here at the top to send a copy of all responses to a specified email address. So it looks like this. You click it, I would put my email address, and every time somebody answered, I get a copy in my inbox. Now I don't want that in this particular case, so I'm going to take that away. You can allow multiple responses per respondent. So if I send out invitations to say 30 people and I have this checked, they can answer more than one time. If I don't have it checked and they have answered and they click the link again in their email, it'll say, thank you very much. We've already received a response from this respondent, this email address. So you can't answer again, basically. We have an option here to display a back button at the bottom of each page in the quest. I would recommend that you not do it because it's not very stable, and that's not just due to our system, but it works the same way as the back button does in your web browser, which means it'll take you back to the last place or page you were in the quest. And what can happen in certain cases is if you click back twice, you're actually deleting the responses you gave on the last page, and you're starting a page before that. So what happens a lot of times is people then click twice on the back button, change one of the answers, and when they click forward, all those answers that they previously entered on what was the last page are now gone. And if you now click back, you're going to start looping. So as I said, I would discourage you from using this, but feel free to put it on, test it during the test and publish, see what you think. You can also, and this is very highly recommended, to have and it's on by default, the opt-out option in your invitations. This is a nice way of making it very easy for the respondents to say, thank you for the invitation, I don't want to participate. And it also, apologies for that, it also adds a status in our system so that if you have reminders for requests, they won't be sent to people who opted out. So it's a way for the respondent once to say, I don't want to participate in this, and then actually never receive any more emails or notifications about this quest. Now, it's worth noting that if they opt out in one survey, that status is not transferred to a second survey. You either have to take their email out of your distribution list or send them the new one and they have to opt out from that. The last option here is send copy of response by email to the respondent. So this basically means every time somebody answers, send them a copy of the response. Now you can do always, you can do optional, or you can do never. That'll be a little bit up to what you choose. For those of you that join us tomorrow for our advanced webinar, or those of you that have used the system a bit, you'll know about a functionality called notifications, which you can use to replace this. I'm not going to mention more about that right now, but sometimes you, instead of sending one of these default responses, you would make a notification a little bit more personal. That would send out a personal response. I'm going to leave this at never. I'm going to click save just so I don't lose any of the stuff we've done so far. Now I'm going to close response options and we're going to go down to quota settings. You can set a quota on a quest. Say you're using it for have people sign up for a conference or sign up for a webinar or something like that. You would set the quota to the same number of responses as you have spots open. And then once that's done, so if you enable this, you get a whole bunch of settings. You would set the quota size up here. And then you have to choose what to do when the quota is met. So if I set 10, what happens when number 11 clicks their invitation or tries to answer? You close the quest or you can redirect them. And then you can write a little message that they get. So just basically, you could say, yeah, there are no more slots available for this conference. There is, however, another one coming up in March. Here are the dates. If you're interested, click this link, something like that. I'm going to go ahead and close the quota settings. And the last one, once again, we're going to save. Last one here is the GDPR settings tab. I'm going to take a little break here so I can take a sip of water. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat now. Questions about either creating a quest or any of the settings that we've looked at so far. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take you through the GDPR settings. Now, this is something we added back in 2018 due to the General Data Protection Regulation law that the EU passed. And this, at first glance, this looks like a very long, I'm going to scroll through it slowly as I speak, very long list of options and boxes and things you have to fill out. Now, let me first just scroll down here. I'll show you this is about as long as it gets. I'm going to go back to the top so we can work our way through it. Now, you don't have to enable GDPR on all quests. There are scenarios where, like if you're doing an internal survey at work, and when people, and in people's contracts, they signed up or they signed that you can collect information about them or you can do surveys, things like that. You might already have their consent to do something like this. but you would have to check that with legal at your company, or elsewise you would fill this out. And even in those cases where you have to fill out the GDPR, you don't have to fill out everything. It's important to work through this slowly. Use these tooltips that we have here, these black circles. They give you very precise information about what needs to be filled in or explained in these boxes. And you can also, for those of you that know a little bit more law, or want to read the actual GDPR, each one of these little explanations here and boxes corresponds to a piece of that law. So this is basically just a form you fill out that will allow you to be compliant with GDPR. Now, what we're going to go ahead and do here is walk through some of the key aspects of this, and then I'll show you a little trick at the end so you don't have to fill it out every time from scratch. Before I do that, I just want to show you there's a button up here, Define Personal Data Questions. So we don't have any questions in our quest right now because I just started creating it, but you would normally click this and it gives you a list of all the questions in your quest and a little checkbox next to each and every one of them. And you would check that box for all of those that could potentially contain personal data. Now what that means is once the retention period, which is down here, expires, then those questions, the answers to those questions is what is going to be deleted. What you can also do if you've set GDPR is use this delete pre-GDPR button. Let's say you ran the quest or you've done it internally and then you're going to add some external respondents, and then you'll add GDPR when you're doing the external part. When you then set GDPR, it's not going to be valid for previous responses that have already been submitted. So you'd have to press the pre-GDPR here, this delete button, to wipe the responses on those same questions that you set in the list here. So without further ado, let's try to make our way through the GDPR pane, or this settings page. Now the retention period is very important to set. You'll see there are two drop downs here corresponding to these little boxes. So the first one is just basically these arrows you click and you set the number of days. Now what you want to keep in mind here is you can also change this. So this is a drop down that'll allow you to set days, weeks, months, or years. Now there's no set rule for how long you can retain data. That depends on the purposes of why you're collecting it and the legality around that. However, what I would encourage you to do is say, for instance, you calculate that, we need this data for 2 weeks. Set the retention period to a couple of extra days, because if this expires and the system wipes all the GDPR data and you call support and you go, oh my God, I have a problem. I was supposed to get my reports out on Monday, but over the weekend, everything was wiped. We cannot help you at that point. This is because in order for us to be GDPR compliant as well, we cannot keep a copy of that data anywhere. So once again, when you set the retention period, give yourself a couple of extra days. Now, the other option you have is to set it for unlimited. Once again, this is possible. It's legal, but you need to have the right consent and you need to make sure with your legal department that you actually have the legal grounds and the necessity to keep data that long. For this quest, I'm going to go ahead and put 16 days. In this next box here, where it says you're going to basically put the criteria for why your retention period is 16 days. So I would put some information about how we're going to use the data, something like we need it for 16 days because the processing period takes that long, or we're going to run through this and this and this step, or we need to keep it for 16 days because we're going to run the survey now and then we're going to run a follow-up in say 10 days and then compare the results. This is basically where you tell them why you're keeping it for the period that you are. Here you can type a welcome message. The GDPR page of a quest will show up at the very beginning of a quest. So if you recall from earlier, I'm going to scroll up right now to show you we had a introduction text here. Now this, if I filled out something in the GDPR, I would leave this blank. There's no need to fill in both. That'll just give the user 2 welcome messages. So I'm going to go back down to GDPR. Now I could fill out a welcome message here saying something about what the quest is about. GDPR, it's GDPR compliant. And then I would go on to this box, which is it has this little asterisk just as the retention period up here. That means they're mandatory. So to be GDPR compliant, it's mandatory to give the purpose of your processing operation and the purpose of what they're consenting to. So this is basically an explanation of explaining to the respondent when you consent to data collection in the survey, this is what we're actually going to collect. This is the purpose of what we're doing. Scroll down a little bit further, you're going to have to put in the name of the company, the entity collecting this data or responsible for the data, and there's the survey, sorry. You're going to put contact details of that company. You're going to put under representative, these are not mandatory, these following ones, but you could put if there is a certain person in the company who's in charge of GDPR, in charge of this data, then you would put their name, maybe some contact information. Then in this box, I encourage you to fill it out, even though it's not mandatory. But this will basically be a list of what data you're collecting and what data you're going to be using. And then you can also specify categories of personal data. Then this is also, even though it's not mandatory, I recommend that you fill this out. This is where you can explain the legal basis for processing data to your respondents. You can put recipients or categories of recipients in this box of the personal data. If you're transferring this data to a non-EU country or organization, this is where you would specify if you're doing that or not, and if to who it is. It is legal to collaborate for a European company, to collaborate with a company outside of the EU. It is legal to transfer that data, but you need consent. You need to have informed them. And there are certain very specific rules to that, which I encourage you to look up in the GDPR law, or check with your local legal representative at work. This is another box where you can put a statutory or contractual requirement, if that's applicable. A lot of these, as I said, are not mandatory, so a lot of this might not be applicable to your particular use. And we also always remember these little tooltips where you'll get plenty of precise information about what they actually expect you to fill in, or what you should explain. So this next box, you can put if there's any automated decision making, what that decision making is, etc. and so forth. This is a box for data subject rights, information about that. This box here, I encourage you, even though it's not mandatory, this one I specifically or particularly encourage you to always fill out, which is information about withdrawing consent. As long as you're asking somebody to consent to something, a survey, a quest, whatever, you should always inform them about how they can withdraw that consent and if there are any time limits. So normally you would just say at any point during the survey or after the survey you can withdraw your consent. We'll delete the data and that's fine. But this is very, very, I'd say important because it helps you build trust, basically. You can put in this box if there's any information about supervisory authorities. Once again, it's not mandatory, so this is at your discretion. If you have a data protection officer, you put the contact information for that person here. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and save so we don't lose any, not that we made any changes. But what you'll see here is you can load a template and you can save as a template. So if I fill this out for the first time, I would now save this as a template. That way, the next time I create a quest and say, it's basically the same quest or it's the same respondents, I can just load this entire GDPR message so I don't have to write it every single time. I'm going to scroll up to the top of GDPR and show you, once again, you'll have the same buttons up here, load template or save as template. Now, if I click load template, it'll give me this. I choose the language. So I'm going to go with English. This is our internal one. That's an example. I click that and it pastes. you'll see now while I scroll down, it's filled out all these boxes for me. What I'm going to go ahead and do now for demonstration purposes is just uncheck this box and then click Save. It'll make it a little easier to demonstrate a few of the things that I'm about to demonstrate. My itinerary now says to move over here to the designer page of Essentials. Does anybody have any questions about what we just went through in the settings? I know it's quite a lot to take in, and we only have an hour and a half today to get through all of these things. So the intention of this webinar is more to give you an introduction to the possibilities that are available and a little orientation of where things are found. We highly encourage you to go back and watch this again or search our community and try, and especially try some of this for yourself afterwards. But as I said, it's not my intention that you now know the entire settings page by heart and can fill it out blindfolded. I'm going to go ahead and click the designer page here. And we're now going to take a look at how we create questions, alter questions, how we can do different answer alternatives, etc., etc. I'm going to go ahead and have a quick sip of water. Okay, so as you can see, over here is our question list. And there's only one question in the list because we just recently created this quest. So we need to go ahead and add some information. Now, I'm going to go over on the right here, and it says question type, parentheses, single select vertical. If I click on this, it'll give me a list of available question types. Now, right next to single select vertical here, you'll see it says default right under the icon now. So that's why when I created the quest, it automatically created a single select vertical question. And that'll always happen when you create a quest from scratch. It has to put one question in there in order to save the quest. So you can change your defaults. I would encourage you to leave it to single select, or if there's a question type you use quite a lot, then go ahead and change to that. But I'm going to leave mine to single select. And now what we're going to do is close this. Well, one last thing I can actually show you is when you hover above one of these. So let's say here on the right here, you'll see an example. So it shows you a little preview of what the question can look like. It gives you a little description below, and we have little suggested use cases over there on the right for each question type. So I'm going to leave it for single select. I'm going to go ahead and close this, and we're now ready to put some answer alternatives and a question text to this question. So I'm going to start here by deleting question number 1, and we're going to just put a simple yes or no question. Now I'm going to put answer alternative. The first one is going to be yes, and the second one is going to be no. And I'm going to go and save. And you'll see now it took away all the empty ones that I had below here. And this is now what my question looks like. I have a question text, and I have 2 answer alternatives. Now what we can go ahead and do is, if we wanted to, we could add in additional information. So if I wanted them to read a certain paragraph, or there's some information they need to know before they answer the question, I would paste it in here. It's the same text editor box that you saw in the settings page and that you'll see several other places throughout Essentials. I can also add media here, pictures, links, whatever I want the respondent to take a look at before they answer the question. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this because this is just a simple demonstration. What you can also do for all our question types is change the weight values. This is more relevant when we start looking at reporting, calculation of averages, things like that. So I'm going to leave that alone for now. You can delete all the answer alternatives if you want to start fresh. And you can add these I don't know or other alternatives. Now, what happens here if you click I don't know is you can put a little placeholder text. So in this case, it could be, well, I don't know is actually quite applicable. And what's good to know about I don't know and other is that I'll show you just here. It looks the same. You can add whatever placeholder text you want. Um, they will not be added when you calculate averages in your report. So if you wanted to say, see how many respondents responded in total, and then you want to take out those that didn't answer one of the specific alternatives, but they said I don't know or other, and you want to calculate your averages amongst those who actually answered anything but I don't know, then you would want to put it here. If you uncheck these, and I'm going to save, and if you added another alternative here, just like yes or no called I don't know, you wouldn't be able to get it out of the calculations. So that's a very important thing to remember when you set up your requests. Now you can also, for single select verticals and a number of other question types, use sliders to display the answer alternatives. Now, since I have a yes or no, it doesn't make that much sense. But if I had a numerical set of answer alternatives, then this is definitely something I would look into. I encourage you to check it out if you have a question like that at some point in your request. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck it again and save because, as I said, this is not numerical, so it doesn't make much sense for me to use that. Now, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go down to question settings, and we're going to see that we have a bunch of different options. So the default is to put a dividing line above the question. This is very handy. It gives a visual identifier of where one question ends and the other one begins and what sort of belongs to one question or one section. You can hide the entire question. You can hide just the question text. So I would hide the question text if I had a lot of additional information or if I wanted to put the question text up there. You can flag it as personal data. This is the same as that button we saw on the GDPR page. You can make the question mandatory, which means they have to answer the question. And then you can randomize the answer alternatives. I'm going to go ahead and not check any of these, but these are quite powerful settings. You can do quite a lot with just a few simple question settings here. So I encourage you to take a look at them, try out a few of them at your own discretion. I'm going to show you one more question type that we have. So as I said, you'll have all these different ones to choose from up here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is use the add button here at the top left, this big green one. I'm going to go add and add a question. And I want to put let's say I want to put a single select horizontal. And I'm going to say, what is your favorite weekday? All right. Or actually just put, what is your favorite day? Now, for this, I'm going to go ahead and save. Well, like that. Hang on. Okay, so now, because I didn't enter anything, it's still asking me to enter. Now, I could type in all the days one by one. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is paste multiple answers from clipboard. So you go here and you can fill them in here. So you just go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, all 7 days of the week. Now we're going to go add, and boom, it fills in all of these for me. And I'm going to go save. And now I have the entire list of answer alternatives. Now you might ask, well, how can I see what the quest looks like? At this point, we've added 2 questions. You talked about dividing lines. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is direct our attention to the top right of the screen. There's a button called Preview Quest, which can be found right here. If I click it, it allows me to see what the quest looks like. So you get this pop-up window. I'm going to center it on the screen here. And what we basically have here is the desktop view of what this quest is going to look like. Now it's all on one page, so that's why we have the send button down here. You can see our 2 questions. These are the dividing lines that I mentioned earlier. This is the quest title. This is the introduction text. and then the thank you note will be on the next page if I click send. Now you can see up here that I can change the themes. So I can toggle different themes if I want to see what it looks like. I'm going to leave it at the standard. And then the last thing I want to show you is show conditions. So if we had done routing now, I'll show you routing in a little moment, but you would see above a question that says this question will only be visible if the respondent has answered such and such, or whatever the condition is. This is handy if you're previewing a quest where you have routing and you want to see everything, but you also want to know how you set it up, so what the condition is and if it really makes sense. This is a quick way to see that. You can also preview in smartphone mode up here, tablet, and you can print a preview. So if you see here on the smartphone and the tablet views, we have this little rotator. So for smartphone, I can go ahead and rotate it, and that will be landscape. And I can rotate it back, and I can do the same thing for tablets. So once again, preview quest, very handy way of seeing what the quest looks like with all the conditions, things like that. It's a nice tool to use when you're designing the quest. I always check in pretty much after every or every other question, depending on how many changes I made, just to get an idea of what I'm looking at, and you know, sort of what the whole quest looks like as a whole. Because here it's very easy when we're working in Designer to deep dive into one of the questions and sort of tweak all the settings, make sure the text is correct. But then you want to be able to see what it looks like on the complete page with the other questions above and below it, and sort of get an idea of the totality of that page. The last thing I want to show you, well, there's actually two things that we have to cover on this page. So for each of the answer alternatives, right? We have little buttons over here. So we can move them up or down, we can delete them, and we can add an answer alternative. This will add an alternative below the one I'm currently in. The other thing that I can do is click this little cog here, cog wheel, and it gives me 4 choices for this particular answer alternative. I can set an action, which allows me, if I click it, so I can say if somebody clicks this answer alternative, I want them to continue, I want to display the thank you note, or I want to redirect them to an external URL. So if I, for instance, at the top of my quest had a question, I was doing a survey from a particular conference that I'd held, and the first question was, did you attend the entire conference? Yes or no? And I only wanted people that attended the entire conference to answer the following questions. I would either display a thank you note or redirect to a URL on no. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this and go back. The other thing we can do is set a quota, how many answers. So if I had a quest, for instance, where people sign up for specific courses and my answer alternatives were the different dates, then I would set a quota. If I had 10 spots for each date, I'd set the quota to 10. And then once the quota is reached, just like for the quota on the entire quest, you can choose to display a thank you note, redirect them, etc., etc. We have a routing that we can set on an answer alternative. I'll display routing for the entire question, or I'll demonstrate it in a short time, in a little bit. But you can also do routing specifically for an answer alternative, and you can add an image to the answer alternative. I'm going to go ahead and cross this out, and I'm going to now go down. So we looked at the question properties. We've looked at the settings, which is this menu or this list with checkboxes for hiding and selecting personal data, mandatory, etc., etc. And now the bottom one, the last one here, is routing. So what I actually want to do is I want to go to my first question up here, simple yes or no. And, or actually, hang on, sorry, I'm going to go back. So let's say that I don't want everybody to see this question. So let's say this was that conference example I just gave, where if you answer no, then you don't have to answer the rest of the survey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Create Condition. It's going to give us this little pop-up with a few choices. Now it's important to remember that routing in Questback Essentials is not a way of determining the order of questions in a survey. It's a way of determining whether a question will be visible to the respondent or not. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here, and we're in question 2, as you can see over here. This is the question that I'm putting the routing on, and it's going to be based on the question before it. So I'm going to go ahead here under questions and select question number 1, and I'm going to say if they answered yes, then they get the question about what their favorite day is. And we're going to apply it, and we're going to save it. Now you see this changed to edit condition. I have a remove condition, and I can apply this condition to other questions. Now what you'll also see up here in the question list is I have a triangle on the question number 1 that says this question is used in a condition. And then I have the routing symbol, it's sort of a branching icon, that tells me that there's routing on this question. Now, what you have to do when you have a routing on a question is there has to be a page break between the question, that is the condition, and the actual branch. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to add a page break. So the add button and add page break. And I'm going to drag this page break right in between. So now I can ask this question, and based upon what they answer, they might or might not see this question. Now, once again, if we preview our quest, you can see now it has a next button instead of the send button. And I have to answer this question, yes or no. So if I click yes, it goes on, and you see now we get, because we have show conditions checked, this is the conditions information box. So it says now, first of all, this box is only shown in preview. This will not be shown to respondents. And it says the following condition must be fulfilled to even see question number 2. And the condition is, if they, on this question, a simple yes or no, which is number 1, if the answers contain any of these alternative, so yes was the only one I selected, so if they answered yes, they'll get question 2. You can do the same principle for answer alternatives. That was that little icon we saw, routing under the cogwheel behind an answer alternative. This is the most common way and the more general way to use routing that I just demonstrated. Now, what I encourage you to do is when you work with routing, maybe write down a little flowchart if you have a lot of questions and a lot of different branches. Always use the test and publish, which I'll show you in a little bit, to make sure you get the feel of how it works. Also make sure that it's possible to get to all the questions in the intended order, or the intended branches, sorry. Because sometimes if you put routing on all your questions and you make this very elaborate scheme, all of a sudden, you'll realize that, well, I actually routed it, so it's impossible to get to the middle set of questions. So that's why I encourage you to test this thoroughly. Make sure that it's actually possible to go the routes that you intended through your survey. This is the designer page. So I would say the important things are add question up here, the preview quest over here, and then all your settings for each question under the properties and the question settings. Now, as I said, we don't have time to go through each and every one of them in super detail, and I can't show you another 10 examples, but I encourage you to use these, try these out on your own, play around with them, and always use the preview quest up here. That way you can always see what it looks like. Now, the next step on my agenda here, or the next thing we're going to look at, is how we test. I've mentioned test quest a few times. If you'd like to shoot some questions my way before I move on to test and publish, feel free to do that. I'm going to grab a sip of water and keep an eye on the chat. Let's see if we get any questions. Once again, I do understand that it's quite a lot of information that I'm throwing your way. We have been going for 55 minutes, pretty much nonstop. There were a lot of settings, or a lot of different places you can check and uncheck and type in this interface. So once again, I encourage you to just try to follow along as best as you can. Make notes of things that sound interesting or things that you want to try, and then go ahead and play around with the software and try it yourself. once you have the time. The best way to learn this is just to do it step by step. Build a simple survey like I'm doing today, and then just try out the different alternatives. You can always search our community for information, and you can always contact support if you should need that. So I don't see any questions in the chat so far, so I'm going to go ahead and direct our attention up to the top right corner here where it says test and publish. And I'm going to click this. And this is our test and publish page in Questback Essentials. Now, there are a few very powerful functionalities that hide behind these simple buttons. So what I want to direct your attention to first is this validate quest button. So what this is it's a function that when you click it, our system will run through the survey and check that all the mandatory fields are filled in, that the routing is applied correctly, which does not mean all your scenarios for routing, all the different branches and ways of going through it can be achieved. It just means that if you set up routing, there's a page break between the routing and the condition, those kind of things, so that it's structurally sound. This will also check your distribution page if you've set all the different fields there. So I'm going to go ahead and click this validation button, validate quest. And so you can see now it found something. So it says validation warning. We recommend. So what this is saying right off the bat is this is not a serious error. This is not something you have to correct, but we recommend that you pay attention to it and correct it before you go ahead and publish. So it's going to give me a type of message. So this is a warning. If it were an error, it'd be red. So this is just a warning, recommended. It says under information, it'll give me a little bit of information about what this error or warning is about. So it says email invitations. The subject field is missing in the default language. Okay, so what that tells me is under distribution here, I haven't put anything in the subject field. Now, I'm aware of that. I haven't gotten to the distribution page yet. So I'm going to go ahead and just click cancel here. Normally here, as I said, you would get, if you get red ones, those are the ones you have to make a conscious effort to change. The yellow ones, we encourage you to look at them. It is advisable to have subject fields in your emails, things like that. But none of the yellow ones are going to stop you from publishing the quest. The red ones will not allow you. If you have red errors, you're not going to be able to publish your quest. So those you have to change. Now, the other option you have up here is test quest. This button right here. This is also a way of previewing your quest, but now you're not going to get the conditions for the routing. This is going to be as if you were answering it and as if you were a respondent. So if I click test quest, we can see here that it says test quest, big red letters, and then it gives me a preview of what this quest looks like. And I'm going to go ahead here and click yes and next. So you can see now I have this progress bar. I only have 2 pages, so it jumps from 50 to 100, but that's just the way it is right now when the quest is short. I'm going to go ahead and click Wednesday, and I'm going to send. Okay, thank you for your participation in this quest. That is the thank you note that we wrote in the thank you note section under the settings for this quest. I'm going to go ahead and cross out and close this pop-up. Now, if you remember, I'll show you again here. I did put routing on question 2, and I made a condition that for question 1, if they answer yes, you get question 2. Now, if we go back to test and publish, we saw that when I did test quest here and I clicked yes, I got the weekday question. So what I want to do now is I'm going to click no and see what happens. Okay, so I get straight to the end. It skipped question 2, and I'm going to click send, and it's going to say thank you for your participation. So now I know that both those scenarios work. And this is a very simple example that I just showed you. But what you want to keep in mind is, and this is why I recommended a flowchart or you make little notes, if you have 40 questions and there are like 6, 7 different branches, then it's very easy to use this tool and test each each and every one of those to make sure that they actually work as intended. Because as I said, routing is, the basics of it are not that complicated, but it's easy, and I've done that myself, to mix it up a little bit so you wind up in scenarios where it's not actually possible to get to a subset of your questions because there's no way to answer correctly, so to speak, to get there because you routed it so much. I'm going to go ahead and cross this out. I don't need this pop-up anymore. So once again, I encourage you, after you're done designing your quest, you use the preview quest whenever you work in Designer, and then come over here whenever you add routing, things like, or actions, other functionality, and use the test quest so that you're able to determine whether or not it works as intended. Test quest is the closest you'll get to pretending you're one of the respondents and seeing it exactly like the respondent will see it. We also have an option to delete test data. Because I just answered the survey a couple of times, this changed from generate test data to delete test data. And then you can view a test report. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete the 2 responses that I added. So now it says generate test data. This is not something we're going to use today. This is basically a function where the system goes through your survey and answers it 50 times. This is very handy if you want to start working on your report before you publish the quest. It gives you a little bit of data for the charts. Makes it a lot easier to gauge how the report's going to look, what kind of sizing you need to think about, those kind of things. So, but today we're not going to look into reports or any of that, so I'm going to leave the test data alone. And I'm going to direct your attention to this little availability option here, where I have to choose before I publish on this green button. I have to say, do I want to make this quest available immediately or on a specific date? So if I click on a specific date, I can set a start date, right? Now, I'm going to go immediately, and I can also set an end date. I don't have to set an end date. I can uncheck, and then the quest will just simply keep running until I stop it. So, but this is checked by default. It's advisable to always have an end date, or at least have an idea of approximately when you want it to end. You can always change this. Let's say you've put the end date to this Friday, but then you want to extend it through the weekend, so you would just go here and change the date. Very simple. And then you can also, obviously, even if you put an end date and you publish, you can stop the quest before that date. So I'm going to go ahead and discard those little tweaks that I made here. So to sum up, the test and publish page is first and foremost a very valuable tool once you've gone ahead and designed a good portion of your quest. You can specifically use test and publish to try out different functionalities, validate the quest, get an idea of, did I miss anything anywhere? Are there things that I need to go back and double check? Does all my routing work? Those kind of things. And then if anybody doesn't have any questions to this, I'm going to give you a few seconds to shoot some questions my way. And I'm going to have another sip of water. Okay, yeah, I don't see any questions coming my way. So I'm just going to go back and recap the designer page for you, because we did go through quite a lot here. So basically, I have my question list over here, which shows me an overview of my questions, my page breaks, and then each of my questions will have little icons based on if I've used routing, if I have actions, things like that. Now you'll also see, since I'm in question 1, that the condition symbol is on this answer alternative, which tells me that that specific answer alternative is used in a condition. We also saw that you can add additional information. We saw that you can paste multiple answers from the clipboard. We went through the I don't know and other alternatives, which are good to use if you want to allow the possibility of answering something else besides your standard answer alternatives, but you don't want them included in averages and other calculations. If you have numerical alternatives, you can display as a slider. You can use it for non-numerical as well. And you can also, under question settings, we saw that you can tweak, you can put a dividing line, you can hide an entire question or a question text, you can flag it as personal data, make it mandatory, and randomize the answer alternatives. And you'll also see now that because I use this question in a condition in my routing, this little thing shows up. So the reason this is here is to tell you if you were thinking of hiding this question, well, your routing is not going to work. Because if nobody can answer the question that contains the condition, the branch in your routing will never be able to be fulfilled. You can never branch out because we don't know the answer to that condition. And we also saw that there's a routing page here where for this question I don't have any routing, so it just says create condition. If I go ahead and click on question 2, where we actually entered our routing earlier in this webinar, you'll see it now has edit condition, remove condition, and apply this condition to other questions. Apply this condition is a fast way of not having to put routing, go through all these steps on additional questions if you're using the same condition for multiple questions. Let's say you have a subset of questions. You first ask them which of these 5 is applicable to you, and then you want 5 subsets of questions. So for each of those subsets, I would apply the same condition. If you answered alternative 1, you get these 3 follow-up questions. If you answered alternative 2, you get these 3 follow-up questions. So this is a very common use case for the apply this condition functionality. Now, we also, after we designed our quest, or while we were designing it, I should say, we previewed over here. And we previewed both for desktop, smartphone, tablet. We rotated for smartphone between landscape and portrait. We saw that conditions for routing will be displayed when we preview. These will not be displayed in the test quest. So that's the main key difference between these two, between preview quest and test quest. And as you can see here, I also I can change the themes to see how it looks with different themes, and so on and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and close this, and we're going to go back to test and publish, which is where we just were before the recap. And we saw that we can validate the quest, we can test the quest, we can generate test data. We can choose if we want to make this quest available immediately, so when we click the publish button, or on a specified date. We can also set an end date for the quest, and then we can finally publish the quest. So what I want to go ahead and do now is, apologies for that, I just tied myself to my chair, is show you one last page in Essentials, which is a good sort of 4th page to know about when you're at the get-go, when you're starting with quests and Essentials. So let's say you've created your quest in the designer, you have all your settings entered under settings, you previewed a little bit, you've done a little test here, it looks pretty much all right, and you click the publish button. So now you need a way to invite people to answer the quest. How do the respondents get access to this so you can start collecting answers? Well, if you go up here, you'll see it says distribution, which is number 4 in our little list of windows here. So we're going to click distribution, and it's going to load the distribution page for this quest. Now, we have a few sections on this page. We can still preview the quest right now because I haven't published it. It's not really, we're not going to see any difference, so I'm going to leave it. Now, this first part here is invitees. So what you want to keep in mind is there are multiple ways of inviting people to a quest to respond. So what I typically like to do before I start adding invitees is I go down to these 2 here. So if I click this, it'll say distribute by email invitation. So now I have it checked, so I know that I can add email invitees. I'm going to get back to all these settings in just a little bit, so don't worry about that. So now what I can do is here I can add invitees. So what I would normally do here is, let's say I click add invitees, I get this pop-up, and there are 3 main ways of importing or adding an invitee. I can type it in manually, I can import from an Excel file if I have a list of all the people I want to invite, and I can select them from my contacts list in Essentials. And you'll see below here, it gives you a little summary of what each option is about. So I'm going to go ahead and do manually for this demonstration. I'm going to click next, and here I'm going to type just test at, questback.com. I'm going to click next, and now it says, okay, you're about to add an invitee. Do you want to invite them via email, which obviously I do because I entered an email address. And then I can invite them immediately after I publish the quest, because as you remember, I haven't published this quest yet. Or I can just add them. Don't send, just add. So that means they show up in the list and I can invite them at a later point. So what I'm going to do now is just add. You see there's a little tooltip here which says exactly what I just told you. You can always send the invitations later from your invitation list. So I'm going to just click next, and it says success. We processed and added one invitee. Okay, so now you'll see I got a little bit more information here in this pane. So under email, it now says my email, or the email I added, the language of the invitation and the quest. The invitation status is not invited because I clicked just add them. There's no response status because the invitation hasn't been sent and is not delivered. This is the date at which I added this invitee. And under scheduled, if I actually had invited them now, it'll say the date of when the invitation will go out. And then I get a little sent or not flag at the end here. So what I can go ahead and do is go back to here. Now I can use either of these now because I only have one, but I'm going to check this and I'm going to go send invitation. And the only option I have is immediately. So you're going to see that now it's scheduled for delivery, but I haven't published the quest yet. So I don't get a response status. I don't get when it's scheduled, and I don't get whether or not it's sent. So what I want to go ahead and do is open up distribute by email invitation. And here I can set the name of the sender. I can set a reply to email address. And this invitation subject field is the reason I got the warning when I tried to validate. So what I want to do is just go and say test. Actually, we're going to say invitation to webinar quest. And we're going to save. And we're going to say this is an invitation to the quest we created during the webinar. And I'm going to save it. So I have a few more options. Once again, this is the same text editor box that you're used to seeing now throughout Essentials. It's pretty much the same as in any word processing software. It gives you the options of bold, italics, underline. You can add pictures. You can do alignment, all sorts of settings. I encourage you to look at them in more detail when you have a little bit more time. Below the email field here, so there is this is just if I want to send a test to myself or somebody else to see what the email looks like. We also have a few settings. I'm not going to go through them in super detail. Feel free to look those up in the community if you want. The other option we have is, I'm going to close distribute by email, is distribute by link. So what I would use this for is if I wanted to generate a URL that leads to this survey, but I want to send it out in my own email system, or I want to add it to my web page, or I want to distribute it some other way. So I would click this, distribute by link, and this gives me the URL. This is a very important setting to take notice of immediately, which is if you leave it checked, every respondent has to enter an email field before they're allowed to answer. So you just might want to think about whether or not you want to collect that information. You can generate a QR code that contains this link that you can, so you can distribute the QR code, or you can make a pop-up script. We have some example code in here. If you want to embed this on your own web page as a pop-up or embed it directly in your page, I encourage you to look at that if it's applicable. I'm not going to go through it in this webinar. And we don't generally support, we don't give user support to the actual code you write. We'll give you user support to whether or not you use the right pop-up script, if it's from our, examples here. But go ahead and play around with this. Feel free to make your own little solutions. There's a lot of powerful functionality hidden in some simple code there. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this, and I'm going to save. And the last thing that we have on our distribution page is the distribution log. So I'm going to go open this. It's not going to contain very much information now because we haven't sent any invitations and we haven't gotten any responses. So, but what you'll see is if I scroll down, it gives us a nice breakdown of our distributions, our invitations up here. So you'll see it has all the different statuses that you can have. We have one schedule for delivery. It'll give you, as people start answering, a breakdown here of the device types. And over here, it'll give you a number of responses from email distribution. So if you open this and want a quick glance at what your stats are, you would check out this number, how many invitations did I send? And then this number, how many people actually responded? You can also get this if you don't feel like looking at all these charts. There's a table tab. This will give you all the same information structured as a table. You can see there are a lot of more fields here. Link distribution, SMS distribution. Those will only be applicable if you add those invitation distribution types to your quest. You can also go through a history here, which of course we don't have any history right now because we just published this quest. So those are basically our distribution page settings. I see that we have a question in the chat here, which is oh yeah, that's a nice little reminder there. If you want to review this webinar, we would greatly appreciate that. I need all the feedback I can get so that I can improve my webinars for the future. Add little things you feel might have been overlooked, things you want me to go into more detail about the next time, or things you might like me to skip, things like that. So feel free to add any comments you want. You can follow the link that's been pasted here. That'll give you a possibility to say exactly what you feel about this webinar, and I appreciate any feedback that I can get. So without any further ado, I've gotten through the things that I wanted to share with you in today's webinar. We've been through the settings page where we set all the different settings for quest types, introduction text, GDPR, quotas, response options, the general settings for our quest. We've gone through the designer page, which looks like this, where we created questions, we changed different question types, we pasted answer alternatives from the clipboard. We went through all the different options and settings that you have. We used the preview quest to keep track of all the things we were, all the progress we were making, what the quest looked like. We used the test and publish page over here to validate the quest. We tested the quest, and we spoke about the key difference between preview quest and test quest, being that test quest allows you to try the survey, go through it as if you were a respondent. So you're not going to get any condition boxes. You're able to try out the routing. You're able to try out the actions. We also spoke about the different ways you can publish a quest, when to make it available, set start dates and end dates. And then last but not least, we checked out the distribution page where we added an invitee. We set up the email invitation with some sender names, reply to addresses, and a little bit of text in the actual email body. We looked at link distribution and we looked at the distribution log. And now just to show you, I just remembered from the test and publish page, I'm going to go back. If I validate the quest now, hopefully, bingo. So last time I did this, I got the little yellow warning and it said there's no subject field in the email invitation. So now it says validation succeeded. The quest was validated without any errors or warnings, so we can go ahead and publish it and use it as intended. So we're going to click close. And with that, I'd like to round off this webinar. I'm going to leave it open for a few minutes now if you have any questions in the chat. please feel free to speak up now and then ask questions, and I'll go through the questions that I get. You can also leave a little bit of feedback in the chat if you feel like that. I'm available for a few more minutes, so I'm gonna just leave it running a little bit now, and we'll see if we get any questions. And while we're waiting for some questions, if we get any, I just want to like to mention here at the end that there's always the help button down here, which gives you access to tutorials, resource center, release notes, the user manual, and you can also click the community button, which will take you to our online community, where you can search for any of the keywords I mentioned in today's webinars. You can find guides and tutorials on how to use things. You can also find detailed release notes in our community. If you see when you log in to Essentials one day that the homepage says, there's an update coming, or we just released a certain version of Essentials, you'll find instructional videos on what's included in that release. You'll find detailed release notes, bug fixes for those that are interested in that. So I highly encourage you to use our community. There's plenty of information there. You can also always contact us at support. I work there myself, along with some very, very knowledgeable colleagues. They're able to help you with whatever you might need help with. And then you can also sign up for training courses. We do regular courses here at the office in Oslo. We also do them in Sweden. And I mean, of course, if you're willing to shell out the money, we might fly somebody to your particular destination to try to do a course, but that will have to be discussed if that's applicable. I don't see, thank you for the comment there in the chat about my presentation skills. That's highly appreciated. I guess at this point, I'm going to sign off here from Oslo. I'd just like to encourage you again, if you've been listening to this webinar today, to click the link in the comments here and rate this webinar. Give me as much feedback as you want. I appreciate all feedback. We need your help. You, the viewers, are the only ones who can tell us what you'd like to have included in these webinars. Are there things that I went through too fast? Things I went through too slow? Are there things I didn't go through that you might want to know more about? Do you want to see more examples? Any feedback is very, very welcome. And with that, I think we're just going to sign off here from Oslo today. Thank you for tuning in to this webinar for about an hour and a half. We've been going now. That's pretty good. I'll be doing another webinar tomorrow where I'll go through reports, filtering, follow-up, basically all the different functionality to work with results, create reports, charts, share our findings from a survey, things like that. So without further ado, thank you for today. It's been a pleasure to host this webinar, and I hope I see some of you back tomorrow or in a webinar in the future.